Well, welcome everybody to the final in our webinar series celebrating 10 years of the University of the Highlands and Islands. This session is entitled Leading Health Research and Innovation. We like to keep this as light as possible, and the way we're going to progress is there'll be a series of presentations, very short ones, really to spark questions from the audience, and we would like you to put those questions in the Q&A session. Unfortunately, all of your mics are muted, so you can't ask any of the questions live, but at the end of the presentations, there will be a panel session led by Dr. Adam Giangreco, and he will put those questions to the panel at the end of the day. So you can see in front of you the program for today. Hopefully a really interesting combination of historical context, which will be led by Rory McNeil and myself, and then some specific examples of our excellence in research, not only from researchers at the university, but also from our commercial partners. And it's important to indicate that this session itself is really being presented jointly with Highlands and Islands Enterprise. So if everyone's ready, I will hand over in the first instance to, I should introduce myself, of course. My name is Professor Ian Megson. I'm Head of Health Research and Innovation at the University of the Highlands and Islands. And as I'll mention later on, I joined the university in 2006, before, of course, it was formally in existence. And so I have seen the progression through from its pre-existence to what we now see as a thriving university that serves the whole of the Highlands and Islands. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rory McNeil, the Director of Business Infrastructure at Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Rory.
Thank you, Ian, and I'm really pleased to be presenting this afternoon. As Ian said, I hope to offer a little bit of a historical perspective on the university and how it came about from the local regional economic development agency's perspective. When I started with HIE back in the day, it was actually an organisation known as the Highlands and Islands Development Board. That was in 1986, so I've been here a wee bit longer than Ian. I did a little bit of ferreting around into the history of HIDB, and it was formed in November 1965. And it was formed as a policy response to what was effectively 200 years of economic and population decline across the region. Brought about initially, I think, by the Culloden debacle and followed through by the clearances in the following century. And so in the 1950s and 60s, the region was in a bit of a sorry state relative to other parts of the UK and elsewhere in economic terms, and indeed there was rapid depopulation, where some wag along the line said that with the last person leaving the Highlands, please remember to put the lights out. So as a policy response, the Scottish office at the time, in the early 60s, decided to create an agency for the region, of the region, that would specifically address this economic and social decline using quite a wide range of powers available to its disposal. One of the first things they did was commission a report, and this is the kind of covering page of that report, 1966, so it was very early on in the agency's existence. And it had a remit of looking at the Inner Murray Firth area and looking at the economic prospects for that and how we might change that. It's a very interesting report, and it can be found in the web link there on the HIE website. It's a 200-page report, so it's quite a long read, but massively ambitious, and it's quite interesting to see how many of this and how many ideas were so wacky that they never came to pass. But one of the ones of real interest to this demonstration is that it recommended that the Highlands and Islands get its own university, which would be technology-based, applied technology-based, to try and create a technology economy. and it likened the institution to Stanford and MIT, so no shortage of ambition there. One might wonder why we didn't get the university back in the day. There had been a new university mooted for Scotland at that time, and there was various regions pitching for it, including the Highland region. But unfortunately for us at the time, it went to Stirling and became the University of Stirling, which was formed in 1967. If I can just roll forward onto the next one. I was a business development manager back in the day, so I had a lot of business engagement and did wonder what all the fuss about was to do with the university. Didn't fully understand why the university would make such a difference to the economy. But a colleague of mine at that time, who was affectionately known as Alistair Oulu, had been over to Oulu in Finland, which is the most northerly city in Finland, and found some startling comparators to Inverness. And in the 1950s, Oulu had a population of about 30,000, as did Inverness. It was basically based on hinterland and was hundreds of miles away from its equivalent of the Central Belt. But roll on into the mid-1990s, Oulu had transformed itself. The population had increased to about 180,000. It was very similar to Aberdeen in terms of scale, but was very heavily technology focused and very a great environment for businesses to set up and thrive, with lots of technology businesses, with the main one being a company called Nokia, which was established there with around 4,500 employees at that time. Pretty staggering transformation in a generation, and Alistair was able to trace back the growth to the establishment of a technology-based university in Oulu in 1958. So you can see how that transformed that region. So it was even more imperative that we get a technology-based university for our region at that time. So we looked around and thought, how are we going to do this? We commissioned a small study called Picking Winners, based on the strengths that Inverness had at that time. It was quite Inverness focused, I have to say, at that particular time. And we had strengths in a district general teaching hospital in Rigmore, which was held in high regard and had an element of teaching through the University of Aberdeen and through the University of Stirling at that time, with undergraduate and postgraduate nursing education and undergraduate medical education. We were also successful in pulling in a business startup called Inverness Medical, based on Boston money, really. It was American funding behind it, looking at glucose and glucose monitoring and diabetes. And it went from a standing start in 95 with about 30 to 40 employees, very rapidly to about 400 employees. So it was really quite successful. And we were still in connection with Oulu at that time, and we said, well, if we were going to add to the mix here, where would we start? And they said you could do worse than create a business incubator. And so we invested in the greenhouse in 2000. It opened in the year 2000, and that was a successful wee project. It was successful in establishing some SMEs at the time, but it was also successful in supporting the development of the university. And if we roll on a bit further, Inverness Medical became so successful it was acquired by multinational Johnson & Johnson around about 2002, and that was a significant step change in that company and in our economy here, and it grew from 400 employees to 1,800 employees in a very short space of time. Really rapid growth, and the glucose monitoring strip that was being produced locally peaked at that time around 4 billion strips per annum, securing 40% of the global market, which again mirrored what was happening in Oulu, where Nokia by that time was selling 70% of the world's phones. So there were great parallels at that time. Lifescan, while cranking up the manufacturing piece, was looking for a centre for its R&D activity, and was looking at Glasgow and Edinburgh and points further south. Liverpool was quoted. And we said to them, well, why not Inverness? Would it not be logical to have it here? And they says, well, you don't have a university. And of course, UHI at that time was a project. It wasn't an actual university. So we came up with the idea of the Centre for Health Science, where we would co-locate the activities of the University of Aberdeen, the University of Stirling, and the University Project, which was the Millennium Project by that time. presented this to LifeScan, and they were sufficiently impressed and enthused about it, and so they placed their R&D activity not within the centre, but certainly co-located with the centre at the slàinte Beechwood. So that was a great success story for us. Moving forward again, what was the next step in terms of creating a innovation ecosystem here, and a technology-based ecosystem here? The partners got together again, NHS Highland, the university, HIE and the local authority, and we were successful in securing 200 acres of land at Beechwood, whereby the partners embarked on an ambitious programme of investment and design. We secured planning permission and invested in various projects, including the main Inverness College building, which opened, I think, in 2015, and Lochran, which is a partnership project between UHI, HIE and Scotland's Rural College, and that opened in 2016, a very collaborative environment. And we continued the growth in and around the campus by focusing on attracting commercial activity in technology sectors and business startup with various support programs. And we're currently planning a new project called the Life Sciences Innovation Centre, which has been tortuous in its development, but we think we're about to break ground over the next month or two on that project. So hopefully that will be a great success as well. And I'll now pass back over to Ian to talk about the next stages. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. That's really fascinating hearing the early years of the development of the university and how it led on ultimately to the introduction of health research. So I'm going to pick it up at that point. And really, I felt that the best way to illustrate the progress that we've made was in this figure here. So you can see the timeline at the bottom there, starting in 2006. And as Rory indicated, that was the point at which LifeScan, Highlands and Islands Enterprise and Scottish Funding Council came up with a package to introduce research to the university, particularly in the diabetes field. Although there was no specific remit to follow diabetes, obviously that was an interest of LifeScan's. The context really was to have a biomedical research unit within Inverness in the first instance, to link up with LifeScan and to enhance their capabilities in terms of research and development. And it was at that point that I joined the university, and I was joined very soon afterwards by Professor Sandra McCrory, who you'll hear from later, who has obviously continued that work in the diabetes arena. But you can see we really started with very small numbers. We had some PhD studentships within the funding, and then it was down to Sandra and myself to really bring in some money and to accelerate growth across the discipline. And you can see in the next 10 years or so, there was reasonably steady but slow growth in a number of areas. And you can see the point at which we became a university in 2011 marked on this timeline as well. And to be honest, at the time, I probably thought that was where we were going to settle, with a head count of around about 20. You can see the black marks there. That was the total head count that we had within our team. But we were very aware that there is a thing in research which is known as critical mass, and that small teams typically are unsustainable in the medium to long term. And it was at this point that we turned to our old friends, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and highlighted this as a problem for long-term sustainability. And we came up with a program which we were very fortunate that Highlands and Islands Enterprise funded, £4 million worth of additional funding to bring in researchers at different levels across our team to offer that security that we and sustainability that we craved. And you can see that that funding combined with city region deal funding that followed pretty soon afterwards, and let's not forget that the two are not unlinked. It was required that we had that sustainability from the high funding in order to get the city region deal funding to come in after it. And simultaneously, we also had the Department of Nursing and Midwifery join us from the University of Stirling, which brought us additional researchers in the social science and nursing arena. And those things together, you can see, had a substantial effect on our size and sustainability. So we increased from roughly 30 individuals up to around about 80, where we're settled at now. So this was a massive step forward. There are, of course, other funding opportunities that came in at the same time. We were very fortunate to receive 12 PhD studentships from EU funding, and we have been successful in a number of funding opportunities, and I'll talk to that in the next slide. So we can't get away from money, unfortunately, and the graph on the left shows our spend against income over the period of the last Research Excellence Framework, which I'll talk to in a second. So from 2014 to 2021, and again, you can see the impact that those two funding opportunities from Highlands and Islands Enterprise and City Region Deal brought to us, whereby our income increased from the high hundreds of thousands of pounds to roughly £2.5 million per annum. So really substantial increases, and I think that's testament not only to the funding that came in, but also to the strength of the individuals that we were able to bring in with the funding that came through those two channels. I've mentioned the Research Excellence Framework. Some of the people on the call will not necessarily have heard of this, but it's an exercise that takes place every 6 to 7 years, driven by governments on all sides of all borders in the UK. And it's a measure of the excellence of research. And increasingly, that measure is not so much about scientific outputs in our case, for example, papers that used to be the measure of excellence, but more about the impact that research is having on communities, on healthcare, and indeed on jobs and wealth creation. And that is why I think we are doing particularly well in this area, because of course both Highlands and Islands Enterprise and indeed City Deal are really keen for the link to be made between academia and industry, and of course the NHS for us is a key partner. So the graph on the right shows the REF scores, the Research Excellence Framework scores that we gained in 2008 and 2014. And really the take-home message here is you can see that the green area starts to appear. That's 4-star scoring from the panel, and that means world-leading research. So in 2008, there were only 2 of us. That's the blue dots. There were only 2 of us. That was myself and Professor Jun Wei, and we were very small, and we did okay. But by 2014, after the university had been created, our international and world-leading research was starting to appear. The latest REF exercise has just taken place, 2021. We don't know the score of that. We do know how many people were submitted, though, and that has increased from 5.2 people in 2014 to 23.6 people this year. So you can see there's been a 5-fold increase in our submission. We do think we are going to do better than we did in 2014. We obviously assess our our submission with externals scoring it. We think we're going to do better, but we're not going to prejudge actually what our score is there. So what is our remit in terms of research and innovation? And I just want to introduce a term to you all today, and we may hear about this later in the panel discussion, but some of you may be aware of the triple helix, a known model by which innovation is known to grow most effectively. And it requires these three strands of business, government, and university working together to drive innovation and, in our context, impact. What is impact for us? Well, most importantly, it's a healthy population. That's really what we want to end up with. We want death rates due to and we also want, of course, an impact on jobs and wealth creation. And there are many aspects of that feed in to how we, operate. So this is here of the university talking about is the UK, but we see coming out of any one of the partners, it has one of the come up with is really to help them beat the technology. It has to be the sides of the development, which are market and scale up, is unlikely to be other partners on their own, and you need the team to work together. So the university might be involved in the evaluation of the trial, they wouldn't be expert at market acceptance scale. That would come from we then have to evaluate the effect of the whatever it is in the and that again might bring in the university at the far end. So all of this requires a highly collaborative, very energetic group of individuals who so like that in the highlights, and I think we punch miles above our weight. We're putting on weight. Maybe that's not the best analogy to use when you next speaker, but it is important to have that criticism to help drive industry within our and ultimately from our
Jill,
Sorry, we have lost Ian a little bit at the moment, so if you can just bear with us. Ian, are you still with us?
I'm wondering, would it be worth moving on to the next speaker, Jill?
I think we should. Right, I'm just going to do that. Daniel, are you ready to go if we move on to yourself?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Daniel, if you want to start, that's great. Thank you.
I can still see Ian's slides, Jill.
Are you able to load different slides, Jill?
Daniel, I can move them on for you if there's a problem. Let's go with it, and just shout to me to move them on.
Okay, as I can still see Ian's triple helix slide. I can't see my own yet. That's great. Thanks, Jill. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Dr. Daniel Crabtree. I work in the Division of Biomedical Sciences. I'm standing in for Professor Trish Gorley today, who's my colleague from UHI Nursing and Midwifery. I'm going to give a brief overview of the Active Health project, which both myself and Trish, along with a number of other colleagues, are involved in. And then I'm going to talk about two of Trish's projects that she leads on, and give you an overview of those. So the Active Health project is a large-scale collaborative project between UHI and external colleagues as well, including those from NHS Highland and also other industries, such as HighLife Highland. It involves rural health, physical activity, behavior change or psychology, biochemistry, nutrition, and digital health. And it's collaborations between all these disciplines that enable the Active Health project to be a success. It started about approximately 4 years ago, and we've had a number of projects ongoing since then, and some successful funding applications and publications as well, along with wider impact. So the first study that I'm going to talk about, that's led by Professor Trish Gorley, is her recently funded UHI evaluation of the Active Health Link Worker project. This is based on the project conducted by Velocity Cafe in Inverness in 2019, which was a pilot study aimed to increase physical activity and active travel amongst patients. The scheme itself involved, or pilot study, sorry, itself involved embedding Active Health Link workers in Highland GP practices. And link workers are individuals who deliver person-centered motivational support and recommendations for physical activity. And the aim of this project will be to examine changes in attitudes to exercise, take-up activities, and self-motivation using in-depth interviewing. The project itself, or the evaluation project itself, will contribute to the development and improvement of the link worker role. This project, as with the last project, are both funded by the UHI Active Health and Wellbeing Challenge Fund. So both received funding this year. And the previous project involves Trish, along with colleagues from Rural Health, NHS Highland and Velocity Cafe. This project also involves Trish as the lead PI, but also NHS Highland's Professor Steve Leslie and Inverness Caledonian Thistle Community Trust. This project is looking to incorporate football fans in training as a mode of delivering cardiac rehabilitation. And previous studies have shown that football fans in training is effective with weight loss, physical activity, and also improvements in diet. And the aim of the evaluation is to explore the feasibility and acceptability of this football fans in training as a mode for delivery of cardiac rehabilitation. And it's hoped that both of these projects will be completed within the next year or so, although current situations have delayed them slightly. And the results will be published in scientific journals and conferences. And these will then projects will look to move on from the pilot data to acquire greater funding and have greater research impact within the community. So thank you for listening. I'd like to acknowledge the funders who support myself and others involved in the Active Health project, including City Region Deal, ECME funding, European funding, and also High Life Highland and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Thank you.
Jill, I can't recall who the next speaker is. Would you be able to?
It's Pal. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to put this to the next slide. Oh, yeah, it's me. Thank you very much for having me here. I'll briefly introduce where I'm coming from and what we do on campus. We are coming exist in the infection control technology space, and we specialize in decontamination of medical equipment. So this is basically what we research, develop, and manufacture here on campus in Inverness. I'll just give you a very, very brief synopsis of how big of a problem we are actually dealing with, because contrary to a popular belief, we are still using reusable surgical instruments. So it's not the case that surgical instruments are all single use, but we are unfortunately in a position that we have to clean them between one patient and another. And surgical site infections in Europe only cost around 19 billion euros, and it affects 500,000 people a year. So we in this space are trying to improve not only the processes that we undertake to clean and sterilize surgical instruments, but we also research and develop equipment that helps in this help with this particular problem. And the statistics I've given you over here are from WHO, so it's not just only my opinion, but people who already looked into it before realized how big of a problem that is. So we are at the moment already manufacturing and selling internationally a range of process change devices, so little tests that help us evaluate and improve processes in hospitals, simply to make sure that we improve patient safety, to make sure that all of the effort that goes into every surgery from the surgeons and clinical staff doesn't go to waste just because someone didn't prepare the instrumentation correctly. So this is what we are already doing here in Inverness. How we are doing it, we have a micro team of engineers and scientists on site. We add research to it and bespoke automation. One of the things that I'm really proud of is the fact that we are actually making the equipment that manufactures our tests in-house, and that was one of the success story. And the research that we do is very often done in collaboration with the university, with the proteomics team and Ian's team, and it's a fantastic environment here where we have the university side by side with us. We have access to experts in the field, and we can grow projects out of that. So that's something where I see definitely our future going forward, to collaborate even more and come up with even better solutions. So I will be leaving us for the Q&A, because there is so much that we do already over here, and I'll be delighted to take questions from you to explain maybe even in more depth what we do and how we are looking at it. But I'm also delighted that Adam Giangreco is here, because he's an architect of a lot of connections between us and the individuals at the university. And from that, even little spin-outs are being born. So that's something that, again, shows us that by working together, we can achieve a lot more than doing it all on our own. So thank you very much, and I'm passing you on to the next contestant. Thank you.
I think I'm next, Jill, if you could put up my presentation.
Yep. You got that, Alistair?
I can see Septium's slide. I've got it now. Thank you very much, Joe. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alistair Keane. I'm a relative newcomer to the University of the Highlands and Islands. I joined just over 2 years ago now, actually in 2019. Slightly unusual in that I've spent the last 30 odd years working in industry. And the reason I joined UHI is because I see it as an exceptional university at an early stage with there's incredible ambition, and as Pavel mentioned, the way people work together in Inverness is quite phenomenal. So I see UHI as being quite different from traditional UK universities, and we can really use that to our advantage to generate some fantastic opportunities for the future. And it's very interesting, following on from Pavel's presentation and his remarks about hospital-acquired infections. We have COVID amongst us now, but hospital infections are still there as well, and they're a massive problem. My background's in physics, and I moved into nanotechnology some 15 years or so ago. And I've applied nanotechnology to physical research, to chemical research, but I see the biggest opportunity being in healthcare. So I've just got a couple of slides really to say, you know, we're having a bit of fun today, we're all celebrating, so what the heck is nanotechnology, and how might we be able to use it in the healthcare setting? Well, one thing I can propose to you is if we have hospital-acquired infections from bugs landing on surfaces, imagine if you could engineer a surface at the nanoscale so that a bug or a virus is pretty much killed or destroyed or disabled on touching that surface. That's an example of the kind of thing we're going to be looking at in our nanotechnology research. So let's go back a little bit. You know, maybe one thing from this afternoon is thinking, right, well, you probably hear about nanotechnology a lot, but what on earth is nanotechnology? So in the age of microelectronics means working at the scale of microns. A micron is about is exactly 1/1000th of a millimeter, and nanotechnology is 1,000 times smaller than that. So we're working down now at one, if you imagine a millimeter, dividing it into 1,000 parts, that's down at the nanoscale. The nanoscale is just above the atomic scale. And for me, it's incredibly interesting because if you look at nature and biology, these all operate at the nanoscale. And what we're doing with nanotechnology is using latest technology to allow us to manipulate things at a very small scale to do something useful. If you look at the picture on the left-hand side, I note that I spelled nanoparticles wrong, so apologies for that. But the white dots you can see there are nanoparticles. They are very small particles. They contain atoms, typically from tens to hundreds to thousands of atoms, but these nanoparticles have properties unlike normal materials. For instance, it's possible to make a metal like copper, but make it completely insulating. It's possible to make incredible catalysts. It's possible to make highly porous materials. It's possible to make materials that behave quite strangely, and we can utilize these phenomena to our advantage. I mentioned that technology was moving on. So if we look at the center picture, this is actually a picture of two nanoparticles which have merged together. But the large light blue circle is encompassing one nanoparticle. The white dots you can see are actually representations of single atoms, platinum in this case. So we can see things at incredibly small scale. And with nanotechnology, we need to be able to manipulate these to generate the phenomena that can do something useful. I said nanotechnology is in nature. Well, a blue butterfly uses nanostructures to give the appearance of a blue coloring. In the last 30 seconds or so, what are we going to do at UHI? Well, we're going to be looking at using nanotechnology to control things like drug release. We'll be making nanosensors so that we can see and characterize individual bugs on surfaces. We will be making surfaces that will actively kill bugs and destroy viruses. And we actually have a project on the go now where we are looking at coating orthopedic implants with antimicrobial or antiviral coatings to prevent infections acquired during operative procedures. So with that, I'll wrap up. Just in a few minutes, I hope I've given you a very small sight of what nanotechnology is and what we can do in Inverness. Thank you, Joe.
And I think next up is Professor Sandra McCreary from NHS Highland, but also the head of our School of Health at the University of the Highlands and Islands. So Sandra, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. So as you heard, my name is Sandra McCreary. I'm head of School of Health in the Highlands and Islands and chair of clinical diabetes. I'm also a consultant physician in NHS Highland, and I joined UHI along with Ian in 2006 when it was the UHI Millennium Institute. And we formed the Department of Diabetes and Cardiovascular Science at that stage. You've already heard how things have progressed since then. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about innovations in clinical care, but mainly around the field of diabetes. And the coalface in terms of clinical care involves mainly these settings of secondary care, primary care, and the community. And you can see in places like Highland that we have to cover a huge geographically challenged area, taking up about 40% of the landmass of Scotland, and where much of the population is remote or very rural. My specialty area is diabetes, and diabetes is a chronic long-term condition with a high and increasing prevalence of 5.6, 5.7%, with over 18,000 people in Highland now known to have diabetes. There's a reduced life expectancy around that, and therefore it's important to prevent complications and indeed to try and prevent particularly type 2 diabetes, or to predict complications in advance, and where possible to try and personalise that care and management. You heard earlier from Ian about the triple helix, and actually I think that's developed further into the quadruple helix now, and that's important because it includes citizens as well as government agencies or public sector such as the NHS, industry and academia, and each has their part to play in actually producing innovations and solutions or new services that we can use at the coalface to serve our patients or service users. And the important part about citizens are that the patient and public involvement helps with the co-design of the co-production, ensures that you'll actually get implementation of any solutions that you're going to develop. So I'm just going to describe some projects. Initially starting with some technology-enabled care projects. The rapid one about reducing diabetes, amputations in diabetes, you've heard about if you'd followed this anniversary series and heard the Rural Health and Wellbeing talks. But the big need here is about diabetic foot ulcers, which have a high mortality, and you can see from the little graph on the right how that mortality compares to other chronic conditions. And as you move up the scale into amputations, it really becomes very serious, with 40 to 60% mortality after 5 years. It also costs the health service a lot of money, up to £84 million in Scotland per year. Our big challenge, therefore, is how to do this within our rural community and to try and provide equity of care in terms of service access and access to specialist staff. And that's where the new service pathway was actually delivered. And you can see the pathway described here and some of the technology that was used. And this was really facilitated by HIE, who introduced us to our technology partner, Tactical Wireless, and funded some of the pilot studies to kickstart the whole process. We're now looking at rolling this out across Highland, and we've already had an economic analysis which suggests that there could be reasonable savings in terms of delivering services this way compared to the more conventional way of having patients travel long distances to meet us in clinics and receive care there. And many of these projects, of course, are leverages for other projects, and we're now involved in a further project called the Connecting Healthcare Project. It's a collaboration of technology partners, clinical partners, academic partners, forming a consortium across Cornwall and the Scottish Highlands, and funded through the European Space Agency. And this again addresses the problem of connectivity, which is a big issue for us in trying to deliver services in our remote and geographically challenging areas. Into this, we've added 2 sub-projects around primary care, medical student teaching, and mental health support. And this is using satellites to help with the connectivity in remote general practices in the peripheries of the Highland region. And said it started out initially as an Innovate UK project application, and the partner we're working with is Goonhilly Satellite in the south of England. And again, collaboration is really important, and we work very closely with NHS, RD&I, who are helping with the coordination of all these projects across the consortium in Highland. The university involved in the evaluation and doing a little bit further health economic analysis. And I mentioned prediction, personalisation is important. So I'm just going to describe a couple of projects also funded through Innovate UK, but through SBRI. We're currently working in collaboration with NHS Highland and 3 companies through an SBRI funded project that involves AI and data mining of data sets that will help us to predict some of the variables at an early stage in diabetes that may well tell us who's likely to get a diabetic foot ulcer, indeed an amputation, or be increased risk of morbidity or mortality because of this. It's very exciting to be able to work with data in this way, and it's actually again leveraged other companies to be interested in what we're doing, and we're having discussions with another company called Unify to look at how we might extend some of this project work. As I said before, working with NHS Highland is really important because the data collation, the governance is really important around data, and getting this right before we work in this kind of setting. The university is involved with interpretation, the integration and patient feedback. Another SBRI project which was funded directly to the university, which is unusual as these are mostly funded to SMEs, was looking at decision support through an app for exercise in people with type 1 diabetes and building an algorithm from information that was entered into a phone app. And we did that in collaboration with a company, again locally introduced to us through HIE, called Open Brawley. And we had quite a lot of success with this. What was particularly important in this project were the involvement of the citizens, in other words, people with type 1 diabetes, who we were able to recruit through Diabetes UK, Facebook, etc., and who were able to actually help with the co-design and the co-production of the app to help make it a little bit more successful. So finally, just to bring things full circle again to Ruth's discussion of the startup of Inverness Medical, finally becoming LifeScan Scotland. As you might imagine, we've had lots of collaboration with both with Inverness Medical and LifeScan over the years, lots of evaluation studies for their technology. They're the innovators in this setting. We're the ones who do the clinical evaluation, but also look at the patient experience with the human factor side of things. It's been important in terms of university activity from publication point of view. And big companies like that often have side benefits in that other companies are formed alongside them with similar interests. And again, we've had lots of input to some of these companies. One in particular is Inside Biometrics that we've worked with to evaluate their meter, which produces a different type of strip from the blood glucose strip in the LifeScan meters, but it also measures blood ketones, which are important in people with type 1 diabetes when you're looking at high blood glucose levels and trying to manage that. And again, we've managed to leverage a potential other project from that at looking at unscheduled care in diabetes, and that's about trying to reduce patients' admission or unnecessary admission to hospital by being able to check for ketones when we're checking blood sugar out in the community. And we're hoping to put these meters out into ambulances through Scottish Ambulance Service for North Highland to try and integrate it into their protocols. And that's working with an Interreg project that we work with Scotland, Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland. So looking forward to see the outcomes of that. One final blood testing is slightly different one that we've actually been able to innovate ourselves. There's a further test in diabetes called the glycated hemoglobin test, which gives you some information about your long-term management. And most of that's done from a venous blood sample from the arm. And we, working with Spot On Science, who are not local to the area, were able to come up with a CSO-funded project that allowed us to look at fingerstick blood testing used on filter paper and then posted back into the centre and analysed on the Rigmore laboratory analysers to look at this test, and it compared very well with the conventional way of doing it. So we're now exploring other ways to get this project actually lifted out into a more community-based project, which I think will be particularly important given the situation of COVID and post-COVID, trying to reduce the footfall of people coming into the centre for testing or for consultation, and it fits very well in terms of remote management of diabetes. So there are a number of other projects. I've only covered a little from diabetes. There are lots of opportunities for collaboration in Highland because, as you've heard from others, we've got the co-location of the innovation centres, HIE and UHI, along with University, Inverness College. NHS Highland are having a national treatment centre built on the campus very close to the Centre of Health Science as well. And many other medical specialty areas are really keen to get involved. And as you've heard already from Alice and others, collaborations are happening all around us with academia, clinicians and industry partners, and many of them, of course, through brokerage from HIE. So thank you for that. I'm now going to pass on to Adam Giangreco, who's going to chair the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sandra. And thanks to all the speakers for their great presentations. So as Ian said, before we had a bit of a technical issue with his connection there, I'm Adam Giangreco. I'm the Director of Health and Life Sciences here within the University of the Highlands and Islands. And in that role, I'm lucky enough to have the chance to work with Dan, Pavel, Sandra, and Alistair actually on a regular basis. So for me this afternoon, this session has really showcased the breadth of some of the activities within the health and life sciences sector within the Highlands and Islands. And really, I hope you've all seen just how much growth has occurred since the university got founded just 10 years ago. And it's important to say, although we've covered quite a lot of stuff already, that really does just scratch the surface of those different activities that are taking place, both within the university and across the region's public, private, and third sector organizations. So at this point, what I'd like to do is open up the question and answer portion of our chat this afternoon and remind everyone to please ask any questions you've got for any of the panelists or for all of them to use the Q&A function on your screens, which I believe is down at the bottom, although it will depend on what type of browser you're using. I can see some of those questions have already come in, and I'll do my best as chair of the Q&A session to get to as many of those as I can. So to kick things off, this is really one for everyone on the panel. What made you decide on the Highlands to do your work and your research? And what are some of the advantages that you've seen in choosing to work here? So I'll come to each of you, but just looking randomly at who's up. Alistair, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, as I mentioned, I've been with the university for a couple of years now. So originally I was an academic, so I worked at studied at two universities, worked at two universities being Strathclyde, St Andrews, Cambridge and Glasgow University, so I've got quite a broad academic experience. But about 30 years ago, I left academia and moved into industry, so experience of very small SMEs and very large manufacturing corporations, probably about I can't remember, about 6 or 7 different companies that I've worked for. And I started interacting with UHI as part of my entrepreneurial background when I was applying for funding for a very interesting technology. And I was introduced to Ian at UHI some 3 or 4 years ago. And it just came to me that I visited UHI a couple of times. And for me, it was a bit of an eye-opener because the university was completely unlike any other university I had been to. I have to say there are some disadvantages of that because by nature and by fact, we're a small university. There's not a huge number of people, and we're a bit remote. But then you can turn that all around and say, actually, all of that's a huge advantage because being remote, it gives us the opportunity to work on some spectacularly important issues to do with rural connectivity, where technology can really have a huge influence on things. The other thing about UHI is that you can talk to anyone within the university. There's not a sense of internal competitiveness within the university, and also there's such an open pathway between talking to the guys at NHS, HIE High, are with us today. We've got Pavel, who's got his small company, so we're working with people, we're working with the NHS, we're all working together. And I see that as very important because in the future, I mean, funding is an issue and it's going to come up, but funding from Scottish government, from UK government, from Europe, we know is going to decrease, certainly from Europe. From within the UK, it's getting harder and harder to get funding. So in order to sustain ourselves down the line, we're going to have to look for inventive ways of generating income from the university. So with my commercial background, I'm very keen for us to start operating and partnering up with interested commercial partners so that we can enable, we still want to do the fundamental academic research, but being us at Inverness, as Ian said, we want to make people's lives better. And if we can do that and generate jobs and some income, that would be great. So that's what my ambition is.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alistair. Maybe there's a natural segue there for Pavel, if you can comment on, from the commercial side, what made you interested in that location into the Highlands for your research and work?
So I was initially completely sold on the James on with the university, with the NHS, and that seemed like a perfect place for a company like ours that is basically fueled by research and development, and that research element is always best done. You have academic partners at your doorstep, and over the years now we have proven through many interactions this worked wonders because our products are simply made better by drawing from the expertise that the academic team has, and also we've done joint projects where we have looked at different terms of scientific elements of product creation, specifically using the proteomics team expertise. And yeah, for us it was wonderful because at the end of the day, who wins is the end user by having a better product.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Pavel. Dan, I'll come to you next on that question.
Well, I'm originally from the area, so it was a good opportunity to move back up, thanks to Highlands and Highlands Enterprise funding. The lifestyle up here is a lot easier going than some of the other places I've lived, so that was a real attraction. You can raise a family up here. I've got family nearby, so it was going to make life a little bit easier for us. So thanks to High for making that possible. And there was a project in mind, and that's still ongoing. And I found that found that quite attractive at the time, and it was a good step in my career to come here.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. And Sandra, maybe to finish off on that question, maybe if you could answer it wearing both the clinical and the academic hat, what attracted you to the Highlands?
Thanks, Adam. So I moved up here from Glasgow, and I didn't actually move up intending to have an academic career when I came up. I came up as the first diabetologist in the area, and the challenge for me was actually the blank canvas, setting up a new service in this very beautiful area, and with all the challenge that came with it. And that was a really great start for me. So when the notion of the Millennium Institute came up and the Centre for Health Science, that was just fantastic as far as I was concerned. I'd done like quite a lot of research as a junior doctor in Glasgow, biomedical type research. And with the appointment of Ian, that brought the opportunity for that academic clinical team to work together in diabetes and cardiovascular research, because that's where I'd started out initially as well. So that was the sort of starting point. And then things developed actually along the route of the service delivery, because how do you deliver services in rural areas? And that became quite important to me in terms of improving healthcare for patients. So there was certainly the scientific side of things, but then there became much more the social science side of things and the equity of care. And that's when we were able to, pull forward the social sciences from rural health and well-being. And then the innovation just really has topped it all, as far as I'm concerned. That brings in the companies and the opportunity to pilot things in these rural areas, using it as a test bed to see what works and to see how you can take things forward. And it's been enormously satisfying to actually work. And it becomes a bit like a sweet shop actually, because there's just hundreds of opportunities, companies, things you can do. And that, I think, is the opportunity that most clinicians actually have if they want to get involved in research here, because whether it's primary care or secondary care, there are always things you can do to improve healthcare. And I think that's what we have in front of us, and these innovations that are happening, across in the new campus on the other side of the A9 can only really support that, I think, because we're in a really good place to take things forward. And that, that working together helix model of everybody brings something to the table is actually your best bet now for getting optimal outputs, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. And really interesting, actually, from all four of you as panelists, how much that collaborative nature and working together for these regional common needs comes across, and how actually all the different parties, so Sandra with your NHS hat on as well, and Pavel from a commercial perspective, and us within the university from an academic output, actually how we can all benefit from looking at those unique elements of the region, whether that's rural or the kind of balance, actually, Dan, that you brought up around lifestyle and being able to do this really interesting work. So another question that's come in, this is from Stuart Black. He's asked, what about the impact and the importance that we've had with EU and city region deal funding that Ian's mentioned in some of his early slides? How are we going to collaboratively continue to thrive and grow now that some of that funding, such as the EU, will be more challenging to access? I wonder who wanted to touch on that one. Shall I start with you, Sandra, because I can still see you on my screen.
Thanks, Adam. I think it's interesting. I mean, we've got a number of EU projects at the moment, and I think there are ways to try and still get EU money. I think we've got that opportunity. You've just got to look at the sort of right partnership, how you pull things together in that sense. I mean, the EU money has really been tremendous for the university in terms of building the university, the EDRF funding, the money for the PhD students, all that kind of side of things has been really important. But I think it's about finding imaginative ways, creative ways around that. What we have now is this great body of research. It's like a great steam engine going now. So it's actually got lots of potential. It's just finding the right funding streams that come in that sort of sense. But I think the enterprise companies are there as part of it. I think there's still funding can come from these solutions. We've still got the research councils. Okay, they're kind of varied in terms of the competitive nature of that. But I think the more you work with other people, the more you've got the opportunity, because when you work with companies, you've got the opportunity of actually getting a sort of collaborative idea to take forward that can involve, you know, as we know, some in-kind funding for part of that aspect of it. There are aspects of clinical care that actually fit into service evaluation. So, you know, you're able to take projects forward from that. I'm talking with the clinical hat on here in terms of the kind of projects that I might be involved in there. It's certainly be different, and it'd be good to hear from others in terms of when you get to more lab-based projects or very heavy equipment-based projects where you actually source your funding in that sense. But I think, you know, between the NHS and UHI, there are opportunities there of actually thinking outside the box about how you take things forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that's certainly a way, is looking at, you know, healthcare needs are not going away, and complex medical needs are not going away anytime soon. So certainly roots there for companies that want to develop in this space. So looking at that, I completely agree. Ian, I can see you've come back to join us. I wondered if you had any comments that you wanted to make on that as Head of Health Research and Innovation.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of important things to remember here. Without question, the EU funding that we've had, together with that from HI and from CityDeal, has been fundamental, as I showed in my early graphs, in getting us to where we are. But we must remember that most of that funding actually was seed corn funding, and we should not become reliant on that. That's not the purpose of that funding. We need to now progress to the next stage, which is to find our own funding, and of course we have been doing that along the road as well. I think the most important thing to recognise is the direction of travel that funding itself is taking, and I'm gonna go back to the word I used earlier. It's all about impact now. It's not about producing a paper of excellence. It is about actually generating research and innovation that's going to help the population and/or create jobs and you know, companies along the way. Fortunately, our model fits that glove perfectly. That is what we are trying to do. That is what CityDeal is about. That is what the HI funding was about. And to a certain extent, that's what the EU funding was about as well. So we can throw our hands up in the air and say, oh my goodness, all our funding sources have evaporated, but they haven't. They have moved. Some have evaporated, but we have to be flight of foot, and I think we can be that. And I think with our unique proposition, I think we can thrive in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Dan and Pavel and Alistair, do you have any more to add to this around funding and how we continue moving forward?
Yeah, I can comment again, but it's really just to repeat what I said earlier. But you know, we have to be more imaginative about the spectrum of people that we work with. So, you know, pure fundamental research is traditionally funded by government or philanthropy, more applied research by industry. But we have to get a really wide spectrum of income. I'm fortunate that a lot of the projects that I've brought to Inverness, I've already been working with partners in industry for many years now. So that's an advantage for us. Where, you know, essentially I'm bringing industry partners to the university, and they're very happy to work with us, because what we'll be doing in terms of research is not within their core business model, but they're happy to support our research in terms of equipment and in-kind contribution. So it's that kind of thing that will help us in the future.
Yeah, I completely second that. And you know, from the perspective of a business that operates from the campus, we just have to find ways how to connect with the wider world beyond that, and how to find projects where we can collaborate and bring value to our campus.
Fantastic. Any final thoughts on that one, Dan, before I move on to the next question?
No, just in agreement with the other two panelists that need to find innovative ways to find funding.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm just having a quick look at time, and I can see we're slightly over, so maybe only time for one more. But I promise, actually, if we don't get to your question and you've put it in, I have made a note of all of them here, and I will put them to all of the panelists after this session. So we will come back to you if you'd like to leave a contact detail, or we'll try to post them in some way so you'll be able to see the answers to the points you've raised. So maybe just a final question quickly to, again, all four of you, and Ian as well, actually, if you'd like. Question is, what do you see as the next big thing in your area, or more generally in health and life sciences, coming in the next 5 years or so? Dan, I'll start with you because I can still see you on my screen.
I think within the active health field, and this has been maybe brought more into focus now with COVID, is more remote and digital technology to assist in physical activity monitoring and delivering exercise classes to try and promote physical activity as well. So I think we're quite well placed for that because we're already doing some work with that as part of our funding through HIE and European funding. But that's probably where the direction was going before COVID, and now that COVID's hit, more remote monitoring and delivery is definitely what we're looking to do.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. Pavel.
We are looking at more automation, robotics, and machine vision in sterile processes space. This is something that we are already partially implementing at in our manufacturing methods, but I would like to sort of develop those technologies further to make them available for hospitals worldwide. And we've only a couple of days ago we've finished testing our latest ultrasonic washer disinfector for super complex surgical instruments, and that trend of getting more and more complex robotized and fully automated surgical instruments is definitely going to go along with the developments of surgical techniques. So we have to also have equipment that makes them safe every time they are used. So I'm glad to say that we are already following that trend, and we are hoping that we will find the right partners to deploy them successfully.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Pavel. Move on to Sandra on this one, if that's right.
Thanks, Adam. I think, I mean, some of the developments others have mentioned are really important. Healthcare robotics, virtual reality, automated virtual reality, etc. The big thing for me also is really artificial intelligence. I think that's very much about prediction of care, and trying to get in at the start when people get to the stage where they've got problems with diseases or complications related to disease. And I think the AI comes down to the interrogation of about certainly across Scotland, access to capabilities, allowing these collaborations with companies to have access to the data to help with technology that are going to be important, and also for personalising care. And I think that we take our lead, of course, in the market and fitness market, well-being, but actually plan that is happening quite rapidly at the moment. I think there's lots of potential for improvement in the service that we provide.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sandra. Alistair, can I come to you about the next big thing?
Yeah, of course you can. And we're meant to be having a fun evening, and I always like to take the long view at past and future. So, I mean, I'm thinking in terms of decades, but since the middle of the last century, the biggest advance in technology in the history of the world is microelectronics, and what that has enabled, that's enabled us to talk to each other today. The advancement of microelectronics is pretty much coming to a conclusion because of something called quantum mechanics. But it's really seen that the next big thing after micro technology is nanotechnology. So we're really just at the beginning of the nanotechnology revolution, and the biggest impact that will have, well, one of the biggest will be in healthcare, because we will be able to measure, detect, prevent disease actively using nanomaterials and nano devices. Moving on from that, Sandra mentioned artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is using software where the software kind of argues with itself to find out the best solution. But what's coming, the next big things that are coming, which will change the world absolutely and completely, will be quantum technologies. So quantum computing is one of those, but quantum technologies are going to absolutely revolutionize how we operate. An example of that's instantaneous communications. And then taking the even longer view, fusion power is coming along. People smile and say, oh, fusion power is 50 years away. Fusion power is now about 20 to 25 years away, and that's because of advances with plasma and superconductors. That's not a direct effect, you might say, on healthcare, but when you can have almost limitless energy, how does that affect humanity? Sorry, it's a big question, but fusion power is coming, hopefully within my lifetime.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alistair. And Ian, do you have a final point you want to make on what you see as the next big thing?
I'm not sure I can follow quantum mechanics really, but certainly in healthcare, I don't know if this is going to be the next thing that comes along, but it certainly should be, and that is a focus on prevention and early diagnosis, and let's get away from longevity. That's not the important thing. It's about quality of life and prevention of the many diseases that we have some control over, particularly those associated with obesity, for example. And for me, that's going to take to use Alistair's words, that's going to take a quantum leap for NHS really to switch from reactive to proactive healthcare.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Ian. And it just really remains for me to thank all the participants for taking part, and actually for all of you in the audience for submitting some excellent questions and coming along to hear what the university and HIE in the region have been up to in leading health research and innovation. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions, but as I said, we will make a note of them and respond after today's event. And I think it's up to me now, although please correct me, Jill, if I'm wrong, to just invite all of you to a couple of related events that are coming up later on this summer. So first of those is on the 17th of June. There will be an inaugural professorial lecture, and that'll be titled Rural Health and Why Our Connections to Land, Landscape, and Community Shape Our Well-Being. And that's from the university's new professor, Sarah Munoz. So she's recently been promoted to that position. That should be quite an interesting conversation, very relevant to those of us living in the Highlands and Islands, but also in rural communities worldwide. And then later on in this year, on the 6th of October, Alistair Keane will be presenting his own inaugural lecture. So an opportunity for you to hear more of an in-depth exploration of the world of nanotechnology. So whether you're a fan of Ant-Man and the Wasp or oh gosh, what was that film in the 80s? Inner Space, I think it was called. You've had a teaser of some of that this evening, so more chance to learn about that later. And then I think that's it from me, just to say thank you very much. And if you'd like to join any future events, you can have a look at what's coming up at the UHI website, as you can see here on the screen. That's uhi.ac.uk/events. And if you'd like to contact any of us around health innovation specifically, you should also feel free to write to innovation@uhi.ac.uk, where we'll aim to respond within just a couple of days. That's great. I think that's it for us for this evening. And thanks again for everyone for attending and participating. And have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
you all.
you.